Once, the Great Plains moved as if alive. More than 30 million bison thundered across the land, from Canada to Texas, a living tide of horn and muscle. For native nations like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Kiowa, these herds were both lifeline and challenge. Here's the catch. Hunting them on foot was a test of endurance, danger, and ingenuity. A single bison could weigh a ton. It could outrun most horses and fight with horns sharp enough to gore a hunter in seconds. Spears and bows carried by men on foot seemed fragile against such power. The pain was real. Each winter loomed with the threat of hunger. A failed hunt could doom dozens of families. Imagine sprinting barefoot across frozen prairie, lungs burning, chasing herds that surged like rivers of fur and dust. Every missed arrow was not just failure. It was a step closer to death. Here's the twist. Despite the odds, native peoples devised methods that stunned even early European observers. They learned to guide herds with fire. They drove them into river bends, narrow valleys, or cliffs now known as buffalo jumps. Entire nations cooperated, signaling with whistles, flags, and smoke. What looked like chaos from afar was, in truth, strategy as sophisticated as any battlefield plan. But here's the painful irony. While the bison sustained native nations for centuries, they later became targets of destruction. Settlers saw not lifelines, but obstacles. By the late 1800s, the vast herds were nearly gone. But hidden behind the stampedes was a secret science. Knowledge of land, animal behavior, and cooperation turned impossible odds into survival. Yet the heart of this story lies not in loss, but in brilliance. How did native nations manage the largest herds in history with no steel, no rifles, and no fences? What insights about ecology, cooperation, and survival still echo from their hunts? The answer may change how we think about both wildlife and civilization. At first glance, chasing bison looked like chaos: dust, hoofs, shouts, and arrows. But here's the catch. The reality was a system of knowledge, refined over generations, a science hidden in story and ritual. Native hunters did not just rush into the herds. They read the land the way others read books. They knew how bison moved with the wind. They saw how herds paused at river crossings and followed the fresh green of spring grasses. Hunters understood migration routes as precisely as sailors knew tides. Here's the twist. Bison behavior itself was their ally. A startled herd ran together, driven by instinct to follow leaders. If hunters could direct that first surge, the rest would follow like a living flood. By studying where bison funneled into valleys, where cliffs broke the horizon, and where rivers narrowed, native hunters turned the land into their trap. Here's the jaw-dropping fact. Modern ecologists say herds once stretched 30 to 40 miles, darkening the horizon like moving storms. Yet native nations developed ways to focus this massive force. Small groups lit grass fires at the edges of herds, sending smoke to steer them. Others waited in ravines, raising flags or cloaks to guide the stampede. But here's the strange part. These methods were never only about the kill. They were about balance. Hunters left young and breeding animals alive. They took only what the community needed, knowing that abundance was fragile. Oral traditions warned against greed, teaching that to waste a bison was to break a covenant with the earth. Archaeologists have traced this wisdom in the soil. At places like Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump in Alberta, layers of bone mark centuries of hunts. Yet in those layers, patterns show restraint. Hunts timed with seasons, pauses for herds to recover. The evidence proves that people thought not just of today, but of tomorrow. Here's the deeper insight. The great hunts were not only about feeding villages, they were also acts of cooperation. Picture dozens of hunters fanning out in silence, flags ready to rise at the first signal, an entire village breathing as one creature guiding the stampede. Elders told stories, hunters sang songs, children carried water, and women prepared campfires to process the meat. The hunt was not just survival, It was society in motion. So behind the thunder of hoofs lay an invisible order, a science of ecology, memory, and teamwork. Native nations managed not just animals, but landscapes, communities, and futures. And that leads to the next chapter, the tools. What specific inventions, bows, arrows, buffalo jumps, fire strategies, made the impossible possible? The answer reveals human ingenuity at its sharpest edge. Here's the catch: raw courage was never enough. To face herds that could crush a village, native nations relied on tools of remarkable ingenuity. Each was simple in appearance, yet profound in impact. The most dramatic of these was the buffalo jump. Picture a cliff edge rising above a valley. Hunters fanned out miles away, steering the herd with smoke, fire, and noise. At the final moment, bison thundered over the edge, plunging into a deadly drop. Below, hunters waited with spears and knives. Archaeologists at places like Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump in Alberta uncovered layers of bone 10 meters thick. That record speaks of centuries of this method. Here's the jaw-dropping part. These jumps were not random. Scouts mapped the land and memorized every slope and funnel. Only certain cliffs worked, where the herd's momentum became unstoppable. Planning took weeks, sometimes months. Success meant food and hides for an entire winter. Failure meant hunger. Beyond cliffs, there was fire. Hunters lit controlled blazes on the prairie, a technique modern ecologists now call fire herding. Picture thin smoke curling low across the grass as flames crept like glowing lines guiding the stampede. The sound of crackling fire mixed with pounding hoofs, turning open plains into living walls. But here's the strange part. The bows and arrows were just as specialized. Arrowheads had broad stone or bone tips sharp enough to pierce thick hide. Fletching was balanced for distance and accuracy. Some records suggest skilled archers could lose 10 arrows in half a minute, enough to bring down multiple bison in a single chase. Here's the surprising upgrade: the travois. Before horses, dogs hauled these wooden sleds, dragging meat and hides back to camp. Each dog carried about 70 pounds. When horses arrived, that capacity jumped to hundreds. Overnight, hunts shifted from fragile gambles to massive harvests. Here's the unexpected insight. Tools were never only physical. Songs, dances, and rituals were part of the arsenal. Before hunts, communities prayed and fasted. Hunters painted their faces, believing symbols linked them to animal spirits. To outsiders, it looked like ceremony. To the people, it was mental preparation as much as weaponry. And here's the deeper point: the tools were collective. A single hunter's arrow could never bring down a herd. But fire, cliffs, travois, bows, signals, and songs together made the impossible possible. Technology fused with ecology, spirit with strategy. Picture this: hunters waving hides to funnel the herd, archers ready with taut bows, flames flickering behind, cliffs looming ahead. Every movement had purpose. Every tool was a thread in a net woven across the land. So when we speak of tools, we speak not just of weapons, but of systems. Systems that turned wild chaos into predictable survival. And that survival shaped behavior. What did the hunt look like in practice, step by step? That is the story of the next chapter. Here's the catch: a bison hunt was never just a mad chase. It was choreography, rehearsed by generations, where every role mattered. It began with preparation. Scouts rode or walked miles ahead, tracking herds, reading wind, and watching migration routes. Elders gathered the hunters, sharing stories of past hunts and reminding them of ritual duties. Women prepared camp, setting fires, sharpening knives, and building racks for drying meat. Children fetched water and carried supplies. A hunt was a village in motion. Picture the start. Hunters rose before dawn, faces painted, bows strung, spears sharpened. The air carried the weight of silence before the storm. Scouts signaled that the herd was near. Then the village moved. Some circled wide to approach from the rear. Others lit grass fires at the edges. Smoke rose, thin and deliberate, drifting with the wind. Here's the twist. The hunt itself was not chaos, but rhythm. Dozens of hunters fanned out in a crescent shape. Whistles cut the air. Flags lifted in sequence. The herd stirred, then bolted. Thousands of hooves shook the ground, the sound rolling like thunder across the prairie. Hunters ran or rode alongside. Arrows flew toward chosen animals. They aimed not at random, but with purpose. Bulls for power, cows for meat, calves spared for the future. Spears flashed, arrows whistled, and the chase roared on. Here's the jaw-dropping part. Stampedes sometimes thundered for miles. Dust filled the air until day seemed like dusk. Communication never stopped. Hand signals, shouts, even songs guided hunters into formation. Some drove the herd toward cliffs. Others steered them into valleys or river bends. Picture hunters waving hides in unison, pushing the living tide where it needed to go. But here's the strange part. Discipline was absolute. One wrong shout, one early arrow, and the herd could veer like a wave breaking loose, crushing everything in its path. That is why cooperation was drilled like ritual. And once the kill was made, the work began. Women skinned hides, cut meat, and laid strips across drying racks. Children carried wood for smoke fires that preserved pemmican. Elders blessed the hunt, offering prayers of thanks, sometimes placing tobacco by the carcass as a gift of respect. Here's the sacred rule: waste nothing. Every sinew, every bone had a purpose. Horns became tools, sinew became bowstrings, hides became lodges. Even stomachs were used to carry water. Here's the deeper insight. The behavior of the hunt mirrored the behavior of the community. Precision, patience, respect. To hunt bison was to act as one body, with every role essential, every movement tied to survival. So the hunt was more than a chase. It was practice in unity, science in motion, and spirit alive in every step. And what came from it was more than food. It was security, resilience, and strength. Those were the benefits, and they shaped not just survival, but the destiny of entire nations. Here's the catch. The bison hunt was never just about meat. It reshaped every layer of life, turning survival into abundance and abundance into culture. The first and most obvious benefit was food. A single animal yielded hundreds of pounds of meat. Roasted fresh, dried as jerky, or pounded into pemmican mixed with fat and berries, it could last through the harshest winters. Some accounts suggest a well-supplied camp could feed itself for months on one large kill. For communities facing brutal seasons, that meant life instead of death. Here's the jaw-dropping fact. Archaeologists find that after horses joined the hunt, the volume of stored meat grew dramatically. Families could carry away not just a few carcasses, but dozens. Winter caches swelled, and survival rates rose. But the benefits ran deeper. Bison provided hides for tipis, robes, and moccasins. Bones became needles, awls, and tools. Horns were carved into spoons and cups. Sinew became bowstrings. Even stomachs were cleaned and used as water containers. Here's the sacred rule: waste nothing. Every part of the animal found its purpose. Here's something most people overlook. Economically, the hunt created wealth. Hides, pemmican, and crafted goods entered trade networks stretching across the plains. Bison hunts fueled markets that linked tribes hundreds of miles apart. Corn from the Mandan might be traded for bison hides, which in turn traveled further, reaching distant nations and even colonial outposts. Here's the twist. The benefits were social as much as material. A hunt demanded cooperation. Success bound villages together, teaching trust, discipline, and shared responsibility. Young hunters learned courage. Women gained honor for their skill in processing hides and preserving food. Elders guided with wisdom, reminding all that the hunt was both gift and duty. Spiritually, bison hunts reaffirmed bonds with the natural world. Ceremonies honored the herd, prayers gave thanks, and stories remembered hunts of the past. Each kill was more than meat. It was a renewal of relationship with the land, And here's the strange part. The benefits even shaped resilience. Communities grew stronger, healthier, and more mobile. With ample pemmican and hides, they could withstand longer migrations, harsher winters, and rival threats. Here's the ripple effect. Abundance gave freedom. Freedom gave power. Picture this. Racks heavy with drying meat, tipis stitched from fresh hides, children playing with bone toys, and elders blessing the herd that fed them. The hunt gave more than food. It gave identity, security, and meaning. Here's the deeper insight. Bison were not just resources. They were partners in survival. To take their lives was to acknowledge dependence, respect, and humility. The benefits were practical, yes, but also cultural, spiritual, and eternal. But even these gains tell only half the story, because the hunt also left a cultural legacy that still echoes today. Here's the catch. The Great Bison Hunt was never only about survival. It was about meaning, memory, and identity. For centuries, the bison stood at the center of native life. To the Lakota, it was Tatanka, a sacred relative. To the Cheyenne and Kiowa, it was teacher and provider. Myths told how the bison gave itself willingly to sustain the people. Hunts were not just battles against hunger, but ceremonies of respect. But here's the painful irony. By the late 1800s, colonial policy turned the herds into targets. Millions were slaughtered not for food, but for profit and to break native nations. Once, 30 million roamed the plains. Within decades, fewer than 1,000 remained. The collapse of the herds was also an assault on culture, memory, and spirit. Here's the heartbreak. Losing the herds meant losing a living heartbeat of the plains. Here's the twist. The people endured even when the herds fell. Songs still carried the rhythm of hunts. Stories remembered the cliffs, the smoke, the thunder of hooves. Elders kept alive the lessons. Waste nothing, act together, respect the earth. The bison lived on in memory, and memory became survival. And here's the jaw-dropping fact. Today, bison have returned. Conservation projects and tribal herds have brought numbers back into the hundreds of thousands. On reservations and protected lands, native nations once again raise, protect, and hunt bison, not only for food, but for ceremony, education, and renewal. The heartbeat of the plains is no longer silent. Picture this, a powwow circle where dancers wear bison robes, children laugh around a fire, and a herd grazes in the distance. The past is not gone, it breathes, walks, and thunders again. But out of loss came a lesson that still matters today. Here's the deeper message. The Great Bison Hunt was never only history. It is a guide. It teaches that sustainability is not new, but ancient. That abundance comes from balance, not greed. That survival is stronger when it is shared. So what do we take away? The hunt reminds us that resilience is built on respect, that the greatest wealth is community, that the land and its creatures are not resources, but relatives. The story asks us to choose, repeat the mistakes of the past, or guard the balance they once mastered. Here's the lasting call. Preserve indigenous knowledge, honor the bison as more than symbol, and listen to the wisdom carried in stories older than nations. Because the bison are still here, and so are the people.